Welcome to the Lawyers Podcast, a series of conversations about law practice. Each week, we talk with legal entrepreneurs and innovators about building a successful law practice in today's challenging and constantly changing legal market. And now, here are your hosts.
Hi, I'm Sam Glover, and this is episode 214 of the Lawyers Podcast, part of the Legal Talk Network. Today we're talking with Alice Armitage about how law schools can teach innovation. Today's podcast is brought to you by Podium, Gusto, and Casetext. We wouldn't be able to do this show without their support. Stay tuned. We'll tell you more about them later on. It's just me today. Aaron went on a Disney cruise in the sun last week, and as revenge on him for missing 2 Minnesota snowstorms, he has a head cold, so it's just me. Today, I want to give some shout outs to Stephanie. Stephanie Everett is our community director, and she is the one who created and teaches the LexxLab program for us. And she's done an amazing job. She just told us, as I'm recording this, that she is polishing up the entire rest of the year's curriculum. So she's done producing the entire thing. It's been great so far. She's gotten great feedback. And I just wanted to share with you one of the great things that lab members have said about her. She just had a call recently with one who called her a business therapist, which is kind of a nice way to talk about the job that she does. You could call her a coach or a trainer. I like to call her like a personal trainer for your law firm. But it's really nice to hear the kind of feedback from lawyers who are trying to build the kinds of practices that they want to have and just need someone to hold them accountable and help. And that's what Stephanie has done an amazing job doing in putting together Lab. And even better, that lab member said she can already see how valuable the lab is for her and her business. So that's awesome. Stephanie, you rock. Just wanted to give a shout out for that. Obviously, if you want to know more about the lab, you can learn more on lawyerist.com/lab, or you can just go to the community nav menu item. Now we've got a brief sponsored conversation with Jake Heller from Casetext, and then my conversation with Alice.
Hey, I'm Jake Heller. I am the CEO and co-founder of Casetext. We are a legal research company that uses artificial intelligence to help you find the best cases in other authorities fast and easily.
Hey, Jake, welcome back to the podcast. And today we want to talk about some tips for getting better prices from traditional legal research providers if you're not quite ready for Casetext yet. So what are some of the tips that you've got for doing that? Happy
to share them. By way of background, by being in this industry, we've come across a lot of different information about how much people are paying with the traditional legacy legal research providers.
Yeah.
And one thing that shocked us was that even for pretty similar legal research packages, you might be looking at costs that vary between $1,200 a month per attorney at the firm, all the way up to $14,000 per attorney at the firm. And that kind of variance, and this happens because a lot of these contracts are secret, right?
They don't publish their prices.
They don't publish their prices, and they make you sign an NDA. And I think that while that is being used right now to make sure that prices stay relatively high, there are a lot of ways to get around these high prices if you're not quite ready to look at other options.
Yeah, very cool.
So the kind of 3 quick tips on that. One, you can negotiate. We're all lawyers. We went to law school. We negotiate settlements. We negotiate fees with our clients. We probably negotiate with our spouse more than we should. And so you can use that same skill to bring down the prices. And I would say the number one piece of advice I have while negotiating is have leverage. Right. If one of these traditional research companies thinks that you need them, then they can charge you whatever, and they'll think you'll have to pay it. But if you make it seem as though you don't need them, you can go to an alternative, you can restrict the amount of content, you don't even use them that much, then they'll be willing to come to the table. And use the fact that you are dealing with an individual salesperson to your benefit, right? Mm-hmm. And get the best price you can. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is to consider limiting the scope of the coverage of your research contract. So what we've heard out in the market is that folks who tend to have a more restricted coverage, for example, just the cases in their state or just the cases in their state and the federal courts, tend to pay less than your $14,000 contract that includes treatises and a lot of other bells and whistles.
Yeah.
It comes with a risk, though, and that risk is twofold. A, if you click on something outside of your contract, you might get a surprise bill at the end for $1,500 or more, and you might be left thinking, why didn't I just, get more content to begin with? And B, if you restrict the amount of content you have, you may actually be putting yourself at a disadvantage compared to opposing counsel. If you're up against lawyers from firms of all sizes or the government, they may or in fact, in front of a judge that may have a full database to one of these research providers, they may have arguments based on analogies to other precedent or to other sources that you aren't going to be able to have access to, and that may put you at a disadvantage. So that's something to think about. But for many practices, it's okay to restrict the amount of coverage, and you'll get by just fine. Tip number 3 is consider actually making a switch. Today, more than ever, there are alternatives that vary in terms of pricing and coverage and capabilities. I'm biased. I'm the CEO of Casetext, and I think that our $65 a month, and even less if you're a lawyer's member with a special offer, right? I think that's a better deal. It gets you all cases, all statutes, all regulations, articles, briefs, etc. But there are other options too. Consider checking out CaseMaker or FastCase, especially if it comes free with the bar, right? And these options will be transparent about their pricing, transparent about what they cover. And it may not be for everybody, especially if you need Lexis or Westlaw specific bells and whistles, but they might be for you. And so, it might be time if you're looking to save money to check out alternatives.
So if you want a great deal on Casetext, you can visit casetext.com/lawyerist, and you'll get a 14-day free trial and 15% off. We'll throw that link in the show notes as well. Jake, thanks so much.
Happy to be here. Thanks for taking the time, Sam.
Hi, I'm Alice Armitage. I'm a professor at UC Hastings Law School in San Francisco, and I'm also the Director of Applied Innovation here at Hastings.
Alice, thanks so much for being on our podcast today. What does it mean? What does that title mean? What is it that you end up doing from your day-to-day work?
Well, I think it's actually hard to define, which is great because it allows me to do a lot of different things in the school and in setting up new programs and initiatives for our students. We're in San Francisco, so everybody kind of breathes innovation, and it seemed like something that would be a benefit that we would have and be able to help our law students to utilize in their future careers, and as well as making our law school have more interesting and exciting programs. So
what are some of the programs that you've started or that you oversee at Hastings?
So I was hired initially to run the Startup Legal Garage, which has been around since 2011. It's an innovative program because unlike a clinic in which the professors are really the lawyer on each of the legal matters that often real-world clients are bringing in, but the students are working for the professor. And the ABA limits those classes to 8 to 10 students. But what we've done at the Startup Legal Garage is try to create a different experience for the students. So they're working with real live clients. These are early stage startups in any industry that have a tech component to their business. But the person supervising the legal work is a practicing attorney. So what that means is it's allowed us to scale this program. So in any given year, and the program runs for a year, in any given year, we will have 50 to 60 students that who are taking a class, a doctrinal class. I'm not teaching that. I'm creating fieldwork projects for them.
Gotcha. So is Startup Legal Garage something that we might think about as like an incubator?
No. No, it's not. But we do have an incubator on campus. That's through LexxLab. LexxLab is an initiative we started just this year to focus on legal technology, startups, and initiatives here at school in order not only to help the legal tech community in general, but also to introduce our students to it. And so we have 4 companies that are actually working on campus, and they come to events that we've created. They come to classes that I'm teaching to learn some of the concepts that the students are learning. The entrepreneurs are there too, which has turned out to be a fascinating byplay of conversations and perspectives on issues that they're both working on. So, and that's one of the things as a director of applied innovation that I get to do, is sort of go off the beaten path of traditional law school and do new kinds of things.
These sound like very complementary programs, right? Like Startup Legal Garage is about exposing students to innovators and helping them understand how to represent innovators. LexxLab, it sounds like, is about asking law students to do some innovation on their own in partnership with legal tech startups. Am I sort of right there?
Well, it's actually a really good thing for the startups in the sense there are startups that start in the Startup Legal Garage. The legal work being done there is primarily setting up companies and doing all the very early legal work. Mm-hmm. And at that point, usually too early to be in LexxLab, where we're trying to, in our program, help them get to the market. What we're offering them is all of our contacts and resources out in the legal profession that legal tech startups find very difficult to break into. But they have to be a little bit farther along. So several of our companies have started in the Startup Legal Garage and then have moved over to LexxLab. For the students are actually doing legal work for those startups. Again, all those very basic needs that a startup has. In LexxLab, it's a more interdisciplinary thing in which the students sometimes work for the startups as paid interns, not doing legal, but doing business sorts of all the little tasks that a startup needs. In my opinion, that will make them better lawyers because they will have seen how entrepreneurs think, how they look at risk, how they assess the decisions that have to be made. And that's all turns out to be very different from how a lawyer would make those decisions.
Yeah. And so I'm kind of curious in general where you see this is how you guys are approaching trying to teach innovation, expose law students to innovation and new ideas and new ways of solving problems. Do you have a feel for what other law schools out there are doing? I mean, I know some are like, we need to teach students how to use law practice management software, but that's not teaching innovation. That's just like teaching people how to do legal research. It's not changing thinking. Is there more? Like, what else is going on out in the law school academic space as far as teaching students about technology and innovation?
Well, there are certain schools that have been very involved for a while. One of them that comes to mind is Michigan State. Dan Katz and Dan Lina were there. Dan Katz is now at Chicago, Kent, and Dan is teaching at Northwestern. Dan's are focused often on computational law and more on they both have a technology background, so they will teach coding sometimes or how to use that kind of thinking to deliver legal services. And they really, in many ways, were at the forefront of this. Suffolk Law School is another one doing really interesting things. They have a concentration in law and technology. Vanderbilt, I know you had Kat Moon on a couple weeks ago, and they're doing great things. But I think in many ways that the law schools are now, like law firms, starting to talk about innovation, but they're actually, other than the ones I mentioned, very few really doing it.
That's my sense. It's a thing you put on like the firm resume or the law school page. We do these things and they're innovative, whether or not you actually do those things or teach them effectively or whatever.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that it's hard to know whether we're teaching them effectively, but even those of us that are doing it, the market is changing so rapidly and the technology is changing. And when I've been creating syllabuses for the classes I teach, and I don't have a textbook. I'm creating them out of whole cloth, looking for things that students can read or can watch. I do a lot of videos that they watch because the information is changing. It's cutting edge things going on in the legal tech space, for instance. And so I can't give them a textbook. And I'd actually, I'm trying to teach them things that aren't traditionally taught in law school. So it's not something that a lot of people have wanted to do today. I hope that changes.
Yeah, I was just having a conversation with somebody who his girlfriend was considering going to law school. And I was like, it's hard to recommend that right now. Not for the reasons that we talked about, in the aftermath of the market crash in 2008 or so. The reason now is there is such dramatic change happening in the legal market, as in all markets. And I'm not sure that there are many law schools that are teaching law students and preparing them for the jobs that they are going to be having, or the companies or firms that they're going to be starting or working for. And I realize change is slow, and maybe I'm jumping the gun on that a little bit, but that's what worries me is how do you get students ready for the market they're going to be entering? We've named 4 or 5 law schools that are making a real try at that. I mean, what does that look like to you? What does the lawyer of the next 5 to 10, 15 years need to look like when they graduate?
Well, so law school right now is focused, for 3 years, you're focused on doctrinal substantive law, and so it's often called learning to think like a lawyer. And we all went through that, those of us that went to law school, and it's very intense, especially the first year. I do think there's a value to that. It is almost like a mental boot camp where they break down all the ways that you've thought about things before and then build you back up to look at things. So I see a value to that, but I don't think that takes more than a year. And I think that what law schools ought to do to make their students practice ready is to then allow them for the next 2 years or year and a half to start learning the practical skills. Now, honestly, so law schools, if you notice who I mentioned, there are some of the top 20 law schools are in that list, but a lot of the people who are innovating are not very high up in the U.S. News and World Rankings. Right. And I think that's because, one, we have a different student base. So, I went to Yale. I loved law school, but it was a purely intellectual exercise. And I got out and, somebody asked me to write a contract. And I was like, what? No, I can write you what ought to be in a contract, but write contract language? I haven't a clue, right? and that was, and law firms that hired you knew that, and they planned that over the next, 2 or 3 years as you practice, you would learn all those skills. But that has changed. Clients don't want to pay for that. Law firms really are hiring fewer people right out of law school. They want laterals who have figured out somewhere else. And so I think that those of us who are, not going to automatically get our students jobs have had to think about, well, how do we get them jobs? And I think that getting jobs means that they have to be practice ready. That law schools have to embrace the fact that this is no longer just an intellectual 3-year degree, that it has to have an aspect of it that is experiential and performative.
I've been thinking about that too, though. Is the idea of preparing students for jobs, though, when I listen to, Dan Katz or Richard Susskind or anyone who's a sort of a thought leader in legal education and innovation talk about the kinds of jobs that we need to be preparing lawyers for, those jobs aren't out there, right? A legal project manager at a small firm isn't a job that you can apply for at more than a handful of law firms in the country. Is it preparing them for jobs or preparing them to just say, screw it, I'm going to start my own thing?
So, no, I don't look at it that way. I see it as preparing them to think differently. So as the practice and delivery of law services changes due to technology, that students have the ability to be flexible, to think about what their role is differently. So there are a lot of I was reading an interesting article today by Ray Strom about how metrics can change the way that lawyers what their jobs will be and what sorts of things will be measured, and talking about outcomes and performance and so forth. And I think that's that's not something, we're a profession that is very tied to credentials and big names and, relying on our sort of laurels in that sense. And metrics could change all of that in many ways. Maybe the way Moneyball changed baseball. This article pointed that out as well. So I just think that you're right. We really don't know where it's going, but in order to have people prepared for that, to be able to accept change, I think we have to help them to have other skills, to have interdisciplinary skills so they understand where their clients are coming from. This comes back to some of the things Kat talked about, human-centered design and understanding, what your client is looking for and can best be served by, and maybe you don't deliver your legal services through a 100-page memo that you've had 4 people working on for 2 weeks, but you create a heat map that they have on their laptop. So, I think I want my students to be able to understand how to think differently than a lawyer. I want them to be able to think like a lawyer. But at the end of the day, I want them to know what that is and then to have other mindsets and other skills that they can pull from to create better services and better client experience for the people they work with.
So we already need to take a break to hear from our sponsors. We'll be back in a minute to talk a little bit more about what that might look like. We'll be back.
Legal research is too expensive, hard to use, and time-consuming. It doesn't have to be. With Casetext, you can save $2,000 and 210 hours on legal research this year. Casetext has unique artificial intelligence technology that does a lot of the research for you. Just drag and drop a complaint or brief, and you'll quickly find cases on the same facts, legal issues, and jurisdiction. Casetext is fast, well-designed, and comprehensive, and it's very affordable. Go to casetext.com/lawyerist to get Casetext for $55 a month. Casetext is modern legal research trusted by over 3,000 small firms and 40 firms in the AmLaw 200. Go to casetext.com/lawyerist to get started. If you have a small business or know someone who does, you probably know that small business owners wear a lot of hats, and some of those hats are totally great. But some, like filing taxes and running payroll, for example, are not so great. That's where Gusto comes in. Gusto makes payroll, taxes, and HR easy for small businesses. Fast, simple payroll processing, benefits, and expert HR support all in one place. Gusto automatically pays and files your federal, state, and local taxes so you don't have to worry about it. Plus, they make it easy to add on health benefits and even 401ks for your team. Those old school, clunky payroll providers just weren't built for the way modern small businesses work, but Gusto is, so let them wear one of your many hats. You have better things to do. Listeners get 3 months free when they run their first payroll. Try a demo and see for yourself at gusto.com/lawyerist. That's gusto.com/lawyerist. In business, reputation is everything. And while online reviews can make or break you, your best clients probably aren't showing up. And that's too bad, because if they did, you'd have more clients, more referrals, and be the top-rated law firm in your area. If you're tired of waiting for reviews to trickle in, you have a choice. Either keep waiting or get proactive with Podium. Podium helps you get more reviews on the sites that matter most. Use their messaging platform to give friendly reminders while sending clients straight to the review sites that you care about the most. With Podium's built-in analytics, you can set goals, monitor progress, and incentivize your team to reach out to more clients. Become the #1 choice online. Visit podium.com/lawyerist to save 10% when you start. That's podium.com/lawyerist to get started and save 10%.
Okay, we're back. So Alice, we've been talking about kind of the idea of practice ready and what might need to change and how that prepares students to practice. What kinds of changes would you like to see? If you could wave your magic wand, what kinds of changes would you like to see every law school making in the way they prepare students?
Well, it's a little bit bigger than just law school. So unfortunately,
Sure.
there's so much about the state bars and the ABA that keep us doing what we do. But if I could change all of it with my magic wand, I would like law school to look a little bit more maybe like medical school, where there is a year or year and a half of doctrinal skills, after which you take, they take boards, but we would take the bar exam that tests on those sorts of things. And then the remainder of law school would be about learning skills that are going to actually be used in day-to-day practice, and also working under someone like a doctor at a hospital. You'd be working with practicing attorneys for almost, they do this in England, where you apprentice for a period of time. And perhaps it has to be a specialty. Perhaps no longer the lawyers will be certified in general to do anything, but it will be more like you become a board specialist in orthopedics or something. You'd be a board specialist in environmental law.
Although I suspect that when it comes to what those students would actually be doing during their apprenticeship, I suspect that you don't think they ought to be doing it in traditional ways, that they should be learning new approaches, or at least some slightly different approaches to how they go about serving clients.
Well, exactly. I mean, those are the kinds of courses I teach. So
yeah, I want to know more about that.
Keep teaching. So I teach a course in how to build your own legal tech startup. And that's not because I necessarily think my students want to be entrepreneurs, but many of them who, we live in San Francisco, they want to stay in the Bay Area, will work with startup companies. And the purpose of this course is to help them understand how their clients may think by making them actually think like an entrepreneur. So I teach them design thinking skills. We go through the lean startup method and agile development and mindsets, how growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, but through the lens of building a legal tech startup. So they actually have to do elevator pitches, and then they do the Amazon future press release that looks backward at all the obstacles that you came over, and they do prototypes, and they have to go out and talk to real users of what their concept. They work in teams to actually come up with an idea. They go out and test it with users, come back, iterate, reprototype. And ultimately, the class doesn't have an exam at the end. It has a pitch competition that legal tech entrepreneurs and investors listen to and give them feedback on. So it is teaching them not only those different interdisciplinary skills, but actually a lot of communication skills. This is something I didn't expect when I started it. But the truth is, in law school, or as a lawyer, we're all going to be talking all the time. But in law school, all you get usually in that area to practice on is moot court. And my students do not want to be litigators. They're all going to be
right.
corporate transactional lawyers, and there is no kind of training for that. So this makes the class stands up, each one of them, and does these kind of skills. Some of them find it quite hard. It's interesting. And then when you're pitching, you're standing up in front of an unknown audience. It's not really different than being in court, but it is what you will do as a lawyer, even if you're in a room meeting with, negotiating a deal. So it's good training.
Do you think that idea translates to lawyers who will go to work for firms that do estate planning or family law?
I think that kind of communication could be taught through the lens of any discipline. And honestly, back to my law school, I think starting even when they're learning to think like a lawyer, there could be an experiential part or a communications part of all of that. So I do think that no matter what's being taught doctrinally, there should be some sort of a practice element.
I mean, that's one of my concerns is like most law schools feel like they're teaching case law and litigation skills, and they're trying to get students jobs, which means maybe small firms, but mostly medium and large firms, when the majority of firms in the country are, 1 to 15 lawyers, and the majority of firms in the country are not doing corporate law, but they're doing consumer law, they're doing estate planning, they're doing personal injury, criminal defense, family law, those kinds of things. And I feel like, I wonder, like, are law schools even on the same page as the legal market? I'm not sure about that.
Well, they didn't have to be in the past, again, because the law firms took it, even the small ones. Mm-hmm. They were going to, you would take a lot of classes in wills in the States, but you wouldn't know how to draw up a will until you watched it being done for a year or two. So I think that you're right, that we are no longer training our students to be able to go out, or maybe we never were, training our students to go out and actually start practicing, but that we have to take on that role. And so that brings me back to this idea that I think students should begin to specialize. I don't think it's, the idea used to be, all you have to do is think like a lawyer and then you can do any kind of law. Well, the world is too complicated. I don't think that makes sense. Right. And why should you know everything about criminal procedure when, in fact, you are going to go be in a small town lawyer that just does family law, right? It's not, it's something you take for the bar, you learn for the bar and you forget. That's a waste of time and effort, frankly.
Do you think it's possible to reframe thinking like a lawyer? I mean, in my mind, thinking like a lawyer as I was trained and as you were trained is mostly about how to solve legal problems by approaching them in a way that you spot the issues and you walk through the elements of the claim and you make your argument, look for case law, et cetera. My vision, I think, would be more like you start from, maybe we use design thinking as the model, maybe we call it something else, but legal problem solving, I think, should look beyond the actual legal issues into what is the actual problem that this person or company has. And then you get at more creative answers like, I had Countertax on, I had Natalie Worsfold on recently to talk about her firm was trying to have better conversations with in-house counsel about the risks and benefits of various litigation strategies in tax controversies. And they're up in Canada, but eventually they just had to build their own algorithm and they wound up spinning it into its own software product because they didn't know how to answer that question in any other way. Or Aaron Levine, who built Hello Divorce out in California to help people get divorced in a way that was different than traditional attorney-client relationship by, offering a whole bunch of assisted DIY stuff, offering a lawyer when you need it, and really reducing the burden of the whole thing. Those feel like the kind of creative problem solvings that ought to be what thinking like a lawyer looks like, but is so rare.
Well, totally. And I don't know how much time you need to understand what it is to be a lawyer and to be able to think critically like a lawyer. Mm-hmm. I think it doesn't have to be taught through cases. It's just that we've never had another method since Langdell at Harvard, figured that out in the 1890s or whatever. And that could certainly be retaught. That will take a while. But I do think that if we still take, the case analysis for a small period of time and then add on it these other ways of thinking. Again, so all that you talked about looking at how do you deliver something that's best for the client, where you understand the client and the context that they work in and the sorts of way they think about legal issues. So, for instance, why do an NDA? Everybody I know at all the startups, we all sign NDAs when we walk in the door. But the truth is, Are they ever enforced? Has anybody ever lost money that way? Why did some lawyers have to why did they spend all the money for some lawyers to write up this 3-4 page thing when in fact there's no real business benefit to that? So, but that would be the sort of thing that metrics maybe would show. So they spent 20 hours drawing this up and, business meetings, and it cost the business $10,000, and there's never been a lawsuit based on any one of those NDAs.
It's a question of the premise every time, right?
Exactly. And so I don't know what metrics will show in the long run, but I do think that we have to that's what I'm trying to give our students for the second 2 years, is a layering on top of those critical thinking like a lawyer skills, so that they don't think that's the only way to solve a problem. Yeah. Maybe you need that if you're going to be a lawyer, but then you have to understand how everybody else is approaching the problem. Because I agree with you. I just think that those are critical skills.
When Will Hornsby and I had a conversation about navigating the ethics rules when you're trying to do innovative things in a legal tech startup or in law practice, we got off on a tangent, which I think was a good one, about what rules or what institutional things would need to change. You alluded to some things about state and federal and state bars and the ABA that make law schools be the way they are and approach education in the way they do. What rules would you change?
Well, I think that something that California has actually created a task force about, and they're supposed to give a report at the end of 2019, I think, actually, about whether legal fees can be split with non-lawyers, that awful word, but with people who are not lawyers. If that one rule changed in a state, and every state, is different, but that's essentially the rule across the country, that would open up the way law could be practiced so that we could have technologists.
So that would flow back down to the way law schools educate.
Of course, because would change. That would force the practice to change dramatically. Honestly, there's so many elements to this fight, because law schools are certainly influenced by where their students will work, but they're also lawyers, and academics are as sort of tradition bound, if not more so, than big law firm partners. And so it's breaking down the thinking that we've all been taught in, and that's very difficult. But I think that if a big rule change came down from the state bars, that would force people to start looking at things differently. There's law firms like Atrium that actually a Hastings grad was a co-founder of, Augie Rakow, that it created a technology firm first and then a legal firm that's separate but has some contractual relationship. And Augie said something really interesting. He sees the problem in big law firms being that equity partners, when they retire, have no secondary market to sell their equity. So they have no ongoing or long-term interest in the firm's profitability. So it's much more like, take it and run. Whereas if there was a secondary market for equity shares, that would change the way people thought, and there might be more R&D and might be more open to other ways of doing business.
If someone at another law school is interested in, hears this and is like, wow, I want to bring some of that learning to my law school, how would you advise them to get started?
Well, I think the great thing about the legal tech community in general, and definitely the legal tech-focused professors at law schools, we're all very willing to share and to talk about what we've done and how we've done it. Each of the law schools and the people I've mentioned have gone at it differently, but everybody has been so willing to talk to me when I was setting up what we're doing here. And I am certainly willing to talk to anybody and see what works, because law schools are different, and things that will work for me don't work at other places, but we all have thoughts about how the world ought to change. I have one more thing to say about law schools that I just want to throw out there. I think that there should be a JD track, which is for people who want to go out and practice law, and a PhD track for those who want to end up being Supreme Court justices or professors or whatever. That they have that in lots of other disciplines. You can get a PhD in some of the business disciplines or medical disciplines, or you can go get something to go out in the workplace. And I think we need to think about doing that ourselves.
I think that's an interesting idea. I guess an LLM is different than that, right? An LLM is more, it's not the same as a PhD in law, right?
No. So an LLM is often these days foreign students who want to come here and then practice in the United States, or it's for a specific specialty like NYU's tax LLM. So it's somebody going in for a deeper dive. But for the purpose of going out and practicing, I can't think of a professor that I know that has an LLM as part of their progression into becoming an academic.
I mean, ungeneralizing the legal degree is kind of a theme in what we've been talking about here. You are interested in, after the the sort of the first year brain rearranging of thinking like a lawyer. You want people to be able to specialize in various subject areas or skills or disciplines. And then you want people to be able to go on and be the sort of the legal eggheads that are able to think about the law in policy terms and make those bigger decisions if they want to go and be a judge or a legislator or something. That's interesting. I don't think I've had time to fully think through the implications of what that might look like in the legal market. What are some of the advantages you think that would have?
Well, I think that would give a track for people who do not worry about finding a job, who don't have to worry about finding a job, or who don't want to actually practice but want to think the big thoughts. And law used to be a more intellectual profession, so I'm told, that, that was lots of people sitting around a table talking about all the great things they were doing, mostly in litigation, right? Mostly in courthouses. But I think there's still people that want to do that. I think that there are big cases that go that way. So you might practice in a certain way. But a lot of time people want to be professors, or they want to be, they'd like to be a judge somewhere, if not a Supreme Court justice. And so I'm not sure that they have to practice law to get that.
Or get the education that goes with practicing law, right? I mean, we talk to a lot of law firm founders who have to learn over time that the job that they need to be doing is leading a company, not doing legal work, even though all of their training is doing legal work. And so maybe there's a track for being a law firm CEO or something like that.
Exactly. And I think there ought to be ways for people to come back in. You might go out and practice a certain way, and then you want to, I think I really want to, I want to do the management of the law firm, and that you would come back into that. But so I think in general, we just have to be much more flexible about what it is that law school means. And I think that it may be that, students will be able to figure that out ahead of time. They've never had to do that. So, and law schools have never had to help them figure that out. So I think that will take some rethinking also of what law schools bring to the table. And I don't think that it should be the rankings. I think the rankings lead students often to make the wrong decisions.
I tend to bounce back and forth between sort of exuberant optimism about the future for law and access to justice and what practice in the market is going to look like, and just frustrated pessimism when I see things like Tennessee just decided it wants to regulate online legal software companies by saying that they're practicing law if they provide legal forms, which is just asinine. But
Wow.
When you look at where legal education is now and where it sits in the world of law, and you look forward 5, 10, 15 years, what gives you reason for exuberant optimism? We'll skip the pessimism. We've been talking about that.
Well, I actually think that there are pressures in the market. This is going to be a market-driven change, I believe. And whether it's market-driven at the law school level, in which we're thinking about how do we get the best students, what can we offer students that they will choose to come to us, other than just going down the rankings and taking it blindly, or it's the market that's coming, the clients that are pushing the law firms to change, and then the law firms then saying, okay, well, if we're going to have to change, we're looking for different skills because we aren't going to train anybody. We need somebody who's going to be able to hit the ground running and think about delivering the legal services that the client actually wants, that can be a partner with the client. That is not a phrase I ever heard when I was in law school, or even really when practicing law. But that's what you hear all the time. I want to be able to pick up the phone and have a lawyer talk to me for, half an hour while we brainstorm how to deal with something. I don't want a memo. I want them to understand the context in which my legal decision is being made. So I think that all those things will filter down and will force law schools to change. And I think by 10 years, 5 years maybe too soon, but by 10 years, you're going to see much, much more of that.
You live in the land of disruption. Do you think 10 years from now, we might look back over the last 5 or 10 or 15 years and think that the change that took place in law schools looks disruptive in retrospect? Because right now it looks like just a slow slog forward.
Yeah. And, I hear a lot of people say, oh my God, the law book can never be disrupted. It's just, it's too, everything plods along in the law. I have a lot of hope that when disruption happens, it's going to happen quickly. And I think there will be a turning point. And, I've watched Uber and Lyft and how that's changed. 10 years ago, who knew? Or before 2007, who would have thought of an iPhone? But when things hit, they hit really quickly. So somebody's going to crack the legal profession and disrupting it. And I'm really hopeful it's within the next 10 years, because I want to be part of it and, be here at law school helping our students be ready for that.
I want to be part of it too. Alice, thanks so much for being with us today. I really appreciate the conversation.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for reaching out. Good to talk to you.
Sure to catch next week's episode of the Lawyerist podcast by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast app. And please leave a rating to help other people find our show. You can find the notes for today's episode on lawyerist.com/podcast.
Lawyerist podcast is produced with help from Lindsay Calhoun and edited by Paul Fisher. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not endorsed by Legal Talk Network. Nothing said in this podcast is legal advice for you.